This sucks.
Due to the well-deserved popularity of Duke Nukem 3D, it got some well-remembered expansion packs, but the one we're looking at today, not so much. So let's find out why as we get Duke Xtreme. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. Duke Xtreme, and yes it is missing the E, was developed by Sunstorm Interactive, with WizardWorks handling the publishing, and it came out in early 1997. I have the slightly later Duke the Apocalypse release, that bundled Xtreme and Duke Zone 2 together. I only have the disc and the manual, which is all you really need, but that original big box, well, it also came with a t-shirt. Oh, that would have been so cool. And while we'll only be checking out one of the expansions, if there's enough interest, I'm sure we could go back and look at Duke Zone 2 another time. Xtreme is made up of 4 parts. The first is this Windows 95 menu. So yeah, we're using a Windows program to configure a DOS game. But the rest of the parts are 25 new single player maps, 25 multiplayer maps, which may or may not be made for this collection, or just taken from the internet at the time, as well as a huge library of mods for the game. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of it all, I want to point out these 2 main buttons on the command and control center. One will launch the game with your current settings, and the other, it will enable everything.
Hail to the king, baby. Holy shit.
That was a lot to take in, but that was due to having everything enabled. Thankfully, using the command center, we can toggle various mods on and off, as well as tweak the settings as well. For example, we can change all sorts of default values for Duke himself, so you can make the game much easier or harder. And you can edit most of the monsters in the game as well. So drones can be taken out with a single hit, or the pig cops can do even more damage with those shotguns. But that's the absolute basics of what it provides, as there are a number of new mods that change the game up. Some are just bad, like making all the broken water mains spray blood and guts. Others are weird, like holding down U's while flying will make you poop. And it's not just what you'd expect, it's also enemies. Some make the game a nightmare to play, as there's a random chance that any item in the game might just explode. But we also get a little bit supernatural, as the enforcers get a chance to come back as ghosts, and will continue to mess with you all over again. Now these might be fun to start with, but they do get annoying quite quickly, so they tend to be something you'll mess around with and then turn off. But there are much more for us to look at, as there's new weapons. Well, I say new, they're mostly reskins of the old ones, and some might even get a few new features. Like we now have a knife, rather than the mighty boot. The pistol is now a silenced Uzi, though I don't think they changed the fire rate all that much, from the original pistol. The rocket launcher now gets some fancy multicolored trails. And if you didn't like the look of the original Devastator, well, now it has a new look. I'm not sure it's an improvement myself, but it doesn't change the way it works at all. Where the freeze gun does get a new mode, as you can now turn people into statues rather than freezing them. Now, none of these are must-haves or even improvements over the original stock weapons, so it's not really needed. The new monsters fare a little better. Now, these don't replace any existing baddie, so they can actually be used to complement the small number the game had. And these new ones include King Cobra, which can be tough to put down as it has a decent amount of health, and it also attacks at quite the rate. And because they jump around, they can be a little bit difficult to get your hands on. We also have the Gorilla Captain, a relatively large baddie with the main attack being the mortar rounds, which it can throw quite a lot of in a very short space of time. Now, these will go down relatively quickly, but they can be a real thorn in your side if you don't target them straight away, as those mortars will go flying. You might also come across the mindless mines. These will just plod around up to the point where you attack them, and then they get mean. I'm not sure you can directly kill them, so it's best to just avoid them if possible, because they can throw a lot of very powerful firepower your way. Now, there are a series of mods that give some wacky death sequences to some of the monsters, that might make them fly around and then eventually explode, or even make them invincible, which is a real pain. But then we got some other really odd ones, like making it spawn lots of rats in huge numbers, or having it so if you're low on health, you'll bleed, and then continue to lose more health. But at this point, I think we should move on. And to show off the single player levels, I've jumped over to using Duke 32, that I've customised with having the new weapons and monsters, but I've disabled most of the other mods as well, they were a little bit too much. The levels roughly fit into 3 episodes. And taking these in alphabetical order, we find our first level that's trying to do that thing that everyone loved with Build, trying to create real world locations, and this one is meant to be a motel and convention centre. But this isn't the best example of that style, as it has lots of small rooms to start with these thin corridors and there's no doors. It also has a very weird sense of scale as well. And the building with the convention, well, it's just mostly filled up with monsters that you have no real reason to enter, as their ending doesn't require any keys or to do any fancy button work or having to solve any puzzles. It's just blow up a few walls and then trying to find that exit button in a really weird location. The next level is in a park, and I'm in a wide open space, and I'm standing, all alone, and I'm staring into space. This level has an impressive size, and it has far more pass through it than you might first expect. But really, there's little to actually do in it, as you'll run around for ages trying to find what the main goal is, which is mostly trying to find the first key, which is very well hidden, but not in any of the bodies of water or the little shack. No, it's down in a sewer that you have to blow open first. And then you have to deal with a bunch of switches, and then you finally find that key. And then you can run all the way over to the other side of the map to finally use it, which directly leads you onto the second key and then finally the exit. Following that up, we get a level that starts with a bang, and it feels like someone really wanted to go to town with the scripting. But the rest of the level, well, it doesn't quite live up to that hype opening. Now, it would be impossible and a little bit boring to cover every single level created for this pack. Plus, if I did, it wouldn't give you anything to experience for yourself if you wanted to go check it out. But I wanted to show off these first few levels to give you an idea of what the rest of the maps are like. And from now on, I'll just show some of the more interesting ones, as quite a lot of the other maps show many of the same issues that we've seen already, as they tend to be physically large, but quite empty, and with the keys tending to be really close to each other. So you find one, that quickly leads to the next, and then if you're lucky, there might be a next as well. And then the exit will almost always be right there for you to go through. They did try to get a little bit fancy with a later level, with it playing with the lighting to make this very moody level. They even put in a working conveyor belt and escalators.
Shit happens. Hail to the king, baby.
And it's not a surprise to find a very small subway. But unlike the proper Duke levels, where they would have had secrets and all sorts of things for you to do while travelling around, here there's not so much. It's amazing how they managed to combine large and short in the same level. Garage might be my least favourite level so far, as they somehow managed to combine some of the worst traits in level design that you can, as it has this mostly open, empty space to start with a few drops, one of which will just kill you. The other, well, it leads you onto an area with a broken texture. Now this is present in the regular Duke version as well. The level also demonstrates something that we'll see a lot of, a really weird sense of scale, as it has some huge doors and massive windows. Everything seems to be out of proportion with our character. But worst of all is that you can actually fall out one of the windows and find yourself in this large outside area, which would have been cool as there's a lot of baddies for you to deal with, but you get stuck down here because you need to have the yellow key. And where is that? Right back at the start. That fall that's meant to kill you, well, there's this tiny little platform that you can land on. And it will take off most of your health, but thankfully you will land on a medipack. And then you can heal up and then jump down further into a flashing room of headaches to finally find the yellow key, get the jetpack, and then fly back out again. Now you know me, I try to bring some positivity to these videos, and while the rest of the levels aren't amazing, they were enjoyable, but this one, it's just oof. And the first episode ends with a map that does quite a lot of weird tricks with the engine. Do you like to walk into water and have to deal with sharks that are swimming by your face? Away you go. And because of this, it actually has quite a few cool moments. And it even ends with this big battle in this arena with lots of baddies. It's just a shame that the lift that's meant to get you in there is broken and doesn't move when you use the keycard on it. The second level opens up with the planet Hoth. A reference to some long forgotten movie or something. They like to drop in these really obscure references. And it's a very white level with some huge canyons. And it continues on with some of the level design trends that we've already seen, as it's quite a linear level, not something that you'd normally associate with Duke 3D. As this feels like it would have been a nice part of a much larger, more intricate level. And it takes playing a few more levels before we find one that actually put some extra effort in. And that was to mark the secrets, so they actually count on that level over screen. As most of the other maps, well, they have areas that might look like secrets, but they don't show up as them and they've not been counted. though quite a few of them, they don't have any hidden areas at all. And with this, the levels are actually starting to feel a little bit more professional, with more interesting designs and fun moments. And even a few neat touches, like this one having the big red button for the missiles that's out of order. The film references continue as we find a bunch of monoliths, with one of them hiding the exit, and every so often you get glimpses of what could be a really fun level, but then it ends just as quickly as it started. I swear most of the par times for the levels are sub 2 minutes. That's if they've even bothered to put a par time in. Pestilence might be one of the best levels so far, as it has this wonderfully moody opening. With you having to go down this well to open up the church, and it has some hidden areas and quite an interesting maze with switches. But once again, it's all over way too quickly. There could have been so much more here for you to have to do. But this was followed up by Rigel, which is possibly the closest to feeling like an actual Duke 3D level of the lot of them. As it's still quite short, their time to beat it is sub 1 minute, but it does a lot of build engine tricks to have rooms above rooms and to have outside areas as well as inside. It's all quite lovely, if very compact. And amazingly, this was the first of 3 expansion packs that Sunstorm made for Duke Nukem, and it's very clear that they learnt a lot from making this one for the next, as they were far more well known and fondly remembered. The first was Duke It Out in DC, and the second was Life's a Beach. And while no one would have said that they were the best levels ever made for Duke Nukem, they were a definite step up from what we are seeing here. And talking of stepping up, Rimshots might be the most Duke named level so far, and the design is actually quite good as well, as it's returning to that real world location vibe, as it's a basketball court with locker rooms
Piece of cake.
and this whole area for food. They even went to the effort of putting in some mirrors, and it's a genuinely decent level. I possibly could have done without the vent maze, but it does have some nice secrets for you to find, which I think makes up for it. And to be honest, it's a pretty decent end to the second act of levels. The third episode is feeling the strongest so far, even if it is the shortest. But they were really starting to put the work into the level designs, so they were far more interesting to look at than just some large boxy rooms. Even if it does have some of the worst switch puzzles you'll ever see. Like having 5 buttons alone is not great, but having them spread around a whole room, that's not fun. But thankfully we quickly move on to Studio 9, and that has some real Duke Nukem feeling to it, as it has lots of interesting rooms and air vents that will connect them all up, and it has this really nice combat area that fills up every time you return to it, with the lights going on and even a big screen in the middle of it. And then we hit toys. Oh yeah, I've always been a fan of the Rats maps when it came to Counter-Strike, so this is quite awesome, as it's a whole house at this scale, and it's a lot of fun. It might feel a little bit empty and simple. I think they could have put far more props in to give it a real homey vibe, but this is one of the few times I think they really nailed the scale and the proportions. But weirdly, as we've seen, none of the maps really link to each other. There's no overriding story that connects them all. It's just a bunch of randomly made levels that feels barely complete and were just thrown together to be put on this disc. I think the focus was more on the control center in the mods than in these single player maps, but it really needed that single player content to sell it. And the real world locations continue as we visit the the YDCC, the Youth Duke Training Center. And it's really some nice work here. A fun little opening area, and then quite a large combat area that you'll return to a few times. But there's also little bits off the side, and even above. They actually played with height for once, and it's really quite cool. But I still think they could have added more to it. Some office areas, maybe something underneath the map. It's just needing just that little bit more. And that would have made it far more interesting. But with that, the single player levels come to an end. And I think it's fair to say it's a bit of a mixed bag. For the most part, they weren't awful, but they weren't up to the standards we had come to expect from the main game. So I think it's clear why this map isn't all that well remembered. And the updated weapons, well, they obviously didn't add much either. But the new monsters were fine. It helped round out that small roster of baddies that the original game came with. But the lazy mines, they were really annoying, and they could have done without those completely. Now there's also a whole range of multiplayer maps, which I'll be showing during this wrap up, where I decided to play against some bots. And for the most part, these maps are quite serviceable. Actually, in some ways they're better than some of the single player maps, and overall far better than most of the mods that came with this pack as well. Now I get the idea behind wanting to do crazy things with the engine, but I felt most of them were just comedy mods that you would use once, have a laugh, and then never want to use again. So they were fun for a video, less for regular gameplay. And after all this, if you want to see me tackle the Duke Zone expansions, then you can let me know with comments, likes, subscribing, all that other stuff that lets me know that you're interested. And with that, I think we've come to the end of this extreme look. So until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was
What a mess.
and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching this expansion pack video. I've done a few other ones in the past, with Red Alert and Doom both getting similar treatments. And if that sounds interesting to you, then you should go check them out. Quickly, go get them. And who knows, I might see you again soon.